Miami could disappear, and the city sinks a little more every year. Right now, while you're watching this, the streets where people once danced under neon lights are flooding with salt water. The beaches where families built sandcastles are vanishing into the Atlantic. And the billion-dollar towers casting shadows over Biscayne Bay are settling deeper into limestone that's crumbling beneath them like wet sugar. This isn't a disaster movie. This isn't some distant apocalypse. This is happening now, and almost nobody saw it coming. Or maybe they did, and just chose to look away. Because admitting that paradise has an expiration date means facing a truth that nobody wants to hear. Miami, the city that never sleeps, the jewel of South Florida, the place where dreams are supposed to come true under endless sunshine, is slowly drowning. And the worst part? We all played a role in killing it. You've seen the photos. Crystal blue water. Art Deco buildings painted in pastel perfection. Palm trees swaying against a sky so blue it looks fake. Miami was the American dream wrapped in humidity and expensive cologne. It was where people came to reinvent themselves, to escape winter, to pretend that consequences didn't exist. For decades, Miami meant freedom. It meant wealth. It meant endless possibility. The city grew and grew, sprawling across wetlands and barrier islands, defying nature with every new condo tower, every new yacht marina, every new highway carved through what used to be swamp. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? The money kept flowing. The tourists kept coming. The real estate values kept climbing. Miami was invincible. Or so everyone believed. But here's what they didn't tell you in the glossy brochures and luxury real estate presentations. Miami sits on a foundation of Swiss cheese. Literally. The entire city is built on porous limestone, a rock formation so riddled with holes and underground rivers that water doesn't just surround Miami, it flows directly beneath it. While cities like New Orleans can build levees and seawalls to hold back the ocean, Miami can't. The water doesn't come from the sides. It comes from below. It seeps up through the ground itself, bubbling through storm drains, flooding streets on sunny days when there isn't a cloud in the sky. They call it sunny day flooding, and it's become so common that residents barely notice anymore. Your car's tires splashing through 6 inches of seawater in the middle of downtown? That's just Tuesday in Miami now. The ocean is reclaiming what was always hers, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Scientists have been warning about this for decades. Back in the 1970s and 80s, researchers noticed something disturbing. Sea levels around Miami were rising faster than almost anywhere else in the world, not because of some local phenomenon, but because of something much bigger, much more unstoppable. The planet was warming. Ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica were melting. Glaciers that had existed for millions of years were collapsing into the ocean, and all that water had to go somewhere. Miami, sitting barely 6 feet above sea level at its highest point, was directly in the path. Early climate models predicted that by 2020, parts of Miami Beach would be underwater during high tide. People laughed. Real estate developers called it fear-mongering. Politicians said the scientists were exaggerating. And construction continued. More towers, more developments, more denial. Then 2010 arrived, and the laughter stopped. Miami Beach, the crown jewel of South Florida tourism, started flooding regularly. Not during hurricanes, not during tropical storms, during normal high tides. Water would surge up through the streets, submerging cars, flooding shops, turning neighborhoods into canals. At first, people treated it like a quirky inconvenience. Instagram photos of people kayaking down Lincoln Road went viral. Tourists thought it was charming, but residents knew better. This wasn't charming. This was the beginning of the end. The city responded by investing millions into pumps and raised roads, trying to stay ahead of the rising water. They spent $80 million installing a network of pumps designed to push seawater back into the ocean. It worked for a while, but it's like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The ocean is patient. The ocean is relentless. And the ocean always wins. Here's what makes Miami's situation so uniquely terrifying compared to other coastal cities. New York can build storm surge barriers. Tokyo can construct massive underground flood control systems. Miami can't. Because of that porous limestone foundation, any wall or barrier is essentially useless. Water flows underneath it.
The aquifer that provides drinking water to millions of South Florida residents is becoming contaminated with salt water. Wells that supplied fresh water for generations are now too brackish to use. The city is literally being poisoned from below while drowning from above. And it's accelerating. Sea level rise that took 50 years to reach 6 inches is now happening in 15. The rate of increase is exponential. What used to be a problem for future generations has become a crisis happening right now. But let's talk about what really killed Miami. It wasn't just climate change. It wasn't just bad luck or geography. It was greed. Pure, uncomplicated, short-sighted human greed. Miami's skyline tells the story. Every glass tower, every luxury development, every artificially created island represents somebody who got rich by ignoring reality.
Real estate developers knew the science. They had access to the same sea level projections as everyone else. But they also knew that people with money don't care about 40 years from now. They care about next summer's rental income. So the construction continued. Penthouses sold for tens of millions of dollars in buildings that scientists said would be partially submerged by mid-century. The developers didn't care. They'd be retired in the Bahamas by then. The buyers didn't care. They saw it as a short-term investment, something to flip before the water rose too high. Everyone was playing a game of musical chairs with billion-dollar real estate, hoping they wouldn't be the one left standing when the music stopped. And it's not just the wealthy getting hurt, though watching millionaires lose beachfront property does have a certain poetic justice to it. The people really suffering are the ones who could never afford to leave.
Working-class neighborhoods in Little Haiti and Liberty City, places where families have lived for generations, are flooding now too. But there are no million-dollar pump systems protecting these streets, no raised roads, no emergency infrastructure. When the water comes, these families lose everything, and nobody's offering to buy their houses for a fraction of what they're worth, because everyone knows the truth now. Miami real estate isn't an investment anymore. It's a sinking liability. Insurance companies have started pulling out of Florida entirely, refusing to cover properties in flood zones, which is basically the entire city. Banks are getting nervous about issuing 30-year mortgages on property that might be underwater in 15. The whole economic engine that built Miami is seizing up, rusting out, drowning in salt water in denial. Walk through Miami Beach today, and you'll see the cognitive dissonance on every corner. Brand new luxury developments with ground floor retail spaces that flood every full moon. Million-dollar cars parked on streets where the storm drains bubble with seawater. Tourists sipping cocktails at beachfront bars while waves lap closer and closer to the foundations. It's like watching a party on the Titanic. Everyone drinking and dancing while the ship slowly tilts. Some people have started calling Miami the Atlantis of America, and they're not entirely joking. The city has the same mythological quality now, this beautiful doomed place that seems almost too good to be true. Because it is. It always was. The psychological impact of living in a dying city is something researchers are only beginning to understand. There's a term for it now, climate grief. The mourning process that happens when you realize the place you love is disappearing. Longtime Miami residents talk about it constantly. The beach where they learned to swim is gone.
The street where they grew up floods 6 times a year. The view from their apartment window shows the ocean closer than it used to be, hungrier. It's death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to ignore individually, but collectively fatal. And beneath the grief is rage. Rage at the politicians who took oil company money and denied climate science. Rage at the developers who built empires on lies. Rage at a system that valued quarterly profits over long-term survival. But mostly, rage at themselves for not doing more, for not screaming louder, for enjoying the party while it lasted. Because it was one hell of a party. Miami's golden age, roughly the 1980s through the 2000s, was legendary. South Beach became synonymous with glamour and excess. Art Basel turned the city into a global cultural capital. Real estate values climbed so high that even shacks in flood-prone neighborhoods sold for $500,000. The message was clear.
Miami was the future. Young, vibrant, diverse, sexy. The city where anything was possible. And people believed it. They poured in from around the world, from Latin America, from Europe, from the American Midwest. Everyone wanted a piece of paradise. The population exploded. The economy boomed. And all that growth required infrastructure that the city wasn't prepared to maintain. Roads built for a few thousand residents were now serving a few million. Drainage systems designed for occasional rainfall were overwhelmed by the new normal of extreme weather events. The city grew too fast, built too recklessly, and now it's paying the price. Hurricane season has become genuinely terrifying in ways it never was before. The storms are stronger now, fed by warmer ocean temperatures. The rain is more intense, dumping amounts of water that the city's failing drainage can't handle. And the storm surge, that wall of seawater pushed inland by hurricane-force winds, reaches farther and higher than it used to. After Hurricane Irma in 2017, parts of Miami were underwater for weeks, not days, weeks. The pumps couldn't keep up. The water just sat there, stagnant and toxic, breeding mosquitoes and disease. People waded through waist-deep water to salvage what they could from their homes. Cars floated down streets like metal canoes. And this was just a Category 4. Scientists predict that Cat 5 hurricanes, once rare, will become common as the planet continues warming. Miami's location makes it a perfect target. Every hurricane season now feels like Russian roulette. Will this be the big one? The storm that finally breaks the city's back? And yet, remarkably, people are still moving there. Not as many as before, but enough to keep the machine limping along. Because here's the thing about human nature. We're really bad at long-term thinking. We see the sun shining, the beach is beckoning, and we tell ourselves that maybe the scientists are wrong. Maybe technology will save us. Maybe it won't be as bad as they say. It's the same logic that keeps people buying lottery tickets and smoking cigarettes. We underestimate gradual risks in favor of immediate rewards. So the towers keep rising, although more slowly now. The restaurants keep opening, although they need flood insurance that barely exists. The city keeps marketing itself as paradise, although the illusion is getting harder to maintain with every king tide that turns streets into rivers. The really heartbreaking part is that Miami didn't have to die this way. If the warnings had been heeded in the 80s and 90s, if building had been restricted to higher ground, if climate adaptation had been prioritized over profit, the city might have survived. Not unchanged, but alive. Instead, decisions were made by people who wouldn't live to face the consequences. They built empires on sand and limestone, collected their fortunes, and left the disaster for future generations to manage. And now that future has arrived, and there's no easy solution. Some engineers have proposed radical ideas: floating neighborhoods, amphibious architecture, managed retreat. But these are last resort options, expensive and experimental. The truth is, you can't save a city that's built on the wrong foundation in the wrong place at the wrong time. Other cities are watching Miami's slow collapse with a mix of horror and fascination. New York is investing billions in climate adaptation. Tokyo is building massive seawalls. Amsterdam, which has been fighting water for centuries, is designing neighborhoods that can live with periodic flooding. But Miami started too late, grew too fast, and built too recklessly. The city became a cautionary tale, a warning to the world about what happens when you ignore science in favor of short-term profit. Climate researchers now study Miami the way archaeologists study fallen civilizations, trying to understand what went wrong so others can avoid the same fate. There's even a term in urban planning literature, the Miami problem, meaning a city whose geography and development patterns make climate adaptation essentially impossible without abandoning it entirely. And abandonment is increasingly what experts are talking about, although nobody wants to say it out loud. Managed retreat, they call it. The careful, strategic evacuation of a city over decades. But how do you evacuate millions of people? Where do they go? Who compensates them for homes and businesses that are now worthless? The economic impact alone would be catastrophic, possibly triggering a regional recession.
Miami's economy is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Its port is one of the busiest in the Western Hemisphere. Its tourism industry employs hundreds of thousands. You can't just shut that down without massive consequences rippling across Florida and beyond. So instead, the city stumbles forward, half denial, half acceptance, trying to squeeze out every last dollar before the water rises too high. There's a neighborhood in Miami Beach called Sunset Harbor that tells the whole story in miniature. 20 years ago, it was considered marginal, too low-lying, too prone to flooding. Property was cheap. Then developers saw an opportunity. They raised the streets, installed pumps, and marketed it as the next hot neighborhood. Luxury condos went up, trendy restaurants opened, property values quintupled. For a while it worked. People paid millions for apartments in a flood zone because the infrastructure made them feel safe. But the infrastructure is failing now. The pumps can't keep pace with rising seas. The raised streets are islands during high tide, accessible only by boat. And the property values are collapsing faster than they rose. Sunset Harbor is a perfect metaphor for Miami itself. A beautiful lie that worked until it didn't. A bet against nature that nature is winning. The environmental damage extends far beyond flooding. Miami's rapid development destroyed vast stretches of wetlands and mangrove forests, ecosystems that naturally protect coastlines from storm surge and erosion. Those mangroves were nature's seawall, a buffer that absorbed wave energy and filtered water. Developers saw them as worthless swamp, taking up valuable real estate. So they dredged and filled and paved, replacing natural protection with artificial vulnerability. Now, during storms, there's nothing to slow the water down. It crashes directly into developed areas, causing billions in damage that wouldn't have happened if the mangroves were still there. The city destroyed its own defenses in the name of profit, and now it's defenseless. The cultural loss is harder to quantify, but just as real. Miami isn't just buildings and roads. It's music and art and food and language. It's Cuban cafes and Haitian markets and Colombian neighborhoods. It's the place where the Americas meet and merge. If Miami drowns, that unique cultural ecosystem disappears with it. You can't rebuild community. You can't reconstruct decades of immigration and integration and cultural evolution. Once it's gone forever. And that might be the saddest part of this entire disaster. Not the lost money or the drowned real estate, but the erasure of a city that represented possibility and diversity and the American dream in ways that few other places did. Young people in Miami are making a choice that previous generations never had to face. Do you build a life in a city with no future? Do you invest in property that will be underwater before you retire? Do you start a business that might have to close when the next hurricane hits? Some are staying, motivated by love of home or inability to leave. But many are going, especially those with education and resources. They're moving to Atlanta, to Austin, to anywhere that isn't slowly sinking into the sea. It's a brain drain, an exodus of talent and energy and ambition. The people leaving are the ones the city needs most to survive whatever comes next, and their departure accelerates the decline, creating a vicious cycle where a diminishing tax base means less money for infrastructure, which means more flooding, which means more people leaving. But wait until you hear what the politicians are saying. For years, Florida's state government downplayed or outright denied climate change. Officials were reportedly discouraged from using terms like global warming or sea level rise in official documents. While Miami Beach was installing pumps and raising roads, the state capitol was pretending nothing was wrong. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Local officials dealing with flooding every day while state leaders insisted it wasn't happening. That's finally changing, but slowly, grudgingly. Because admitting that climate change is real means admitting that policies and decisions made over decades were catastrophically wrong. It means accountability. And politicians hate accountability more than they hate rising water. The insurance industry saw reality before the politicians did. Major insurers have pulled out of Florida entirely or raised rates so high that coverage is essentially unaffordable. When insurance companies, whose entire business model is calculating risk, decide that Miami is too risky, that tells you everything you need to know. Some homeowners are paying more in flood insurance than in mortgage payments. Others are going without coverage entirely, gambling that disaster won't strike while they own the property. It's a housing market built on delusion and denial, and when it finally collapses, the economic damage will be measured in the tens of billions. There are still optimists, people who insist that technology will save Miami. They point to Dutch engineering, to floating architecture, to experimental materials that can withstand salt water. And yes, some of these technologies are impressive, but they're also expensive, unproven at scale, and require coordinated planning that Miami has never managed to achieve. The city has always been about individual profit over collective good, every developer and politician out for themselves. That mindset built Miami, and it's also killing it. You can't engineer your way out of a problem created by greed and denial without fundamentally changing how decisions are made. And there's no sign that change is coming. The comparison to Atlantis isn't just poetic. Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was a wealthy island civilization that angered the gods through arrogance and greed and was punished by being swallowed by the sea. Miami's story is remarkably similar, minus the gods. Human arrogance and greed built a city in the wrong place, and now the sea is taking it back. Future generations might look at Miami the way we look at Atlantis, as a cautionary myth about hubris and the consequences of ignoring nature. Except Miami is real. Its destruction is documented, and we're watching it happen in real time. Some researchers predict that by 2070, much of Miami will be uninhabitable. Parts of Miami Beach will be permanently submerged. Downtown will flood with every high tide. The airport will require constant pumping to stay operational. The highways connecting Miami to the rest of Florida will be regularly impassable. The city will still technically exist, but as a shadow of itself, a hollow shell maintained at enormous cost for a shrinking population that can't afford to leave. Other models are even grimmer, predicting near total abandonment by the end of the century. The variables are enormous, depending on how fast the planet warms, how much ice melts, how strong storms become. But all the models agree on one thing. Miami, as we know it, is finished. Empty tables in restaurants that used to require reservations weeks in advance. Empty streets that once pulsed with nightlife and energy. Empty towers reflecting empty sky. This is the future that Miami is sliding toward, not with a bang, but with a gradual, inexorable drowning. The saddest part is how preventable it was, how many warnings were ignored, how many scientists were mocked. How many opportunities to change course were squandered in favor of one more development deal, one more election cycle, one more year of pretending that tomorrow would never come. The lesson Miami teaches is brutal but clear. Nature doesn't negotiate. You can't charm or bribe or spin your way out of physics. The ocean rises because ice melts. Ice melts because the planet warms. The planet warms because we filled the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. It's cause and effect, action and consequence, and no amount of denial changes the reality. Miami bet against that reality and lost. The question now is whether other cities will learn from Miami's fate or repeat the same mistakes until they're drowning too. There's something almost beautiful about watching sunset over Biscay Bay now, knowing that every orange and pink reflection on the water is a reminder of what's being lost. The pelicans still dive for fish. The boats still motor past. Life goes on, until it doesn't. And that's perhaps the most human thing about Miami's story. We're capable of living with apocalypse, of maintaining normalcy in the face of slow disaster, of dancing until the very last song. Maybe that's resilience. Maybe it's delusion. Probably it's both. If you've watched your own hometown change beyond recognition, if you've felt that grief of losing places that shaped you, then you understand what Miamians are experiencing now. And if you found this story as haunting as we did, consider subscribing, because the world is full of cities on the edge, places where human ambition built too close to nature's power. Miami won't be the last to disappear. It might not even be the worst, but it will be remembered as the city that saw the wave coming and kept building sandcastles anyway. The next story might reveal where everyone's going when the water finally wins.